Yesterday, for the first time, 343 revealed the Halo Infinite competitive and ranked settings that we're going to be using, at least at the launch of the game. So in this video, we're going to go over those settings, what exactly a lot of it means, and kind of just my opinions on the settings. So with that said, let's just get right into the video. Before diving into any of my thoughts or anything like that, I thought I would just quickly go over kind of like a TLDR if you just want these settings and you don't really care for the rest of the stuff in this video. Basically, in competitive and ranked, and I'll kind of expand on why I'm using those terms interchangeably later, we will be seeing BR starts, no radar, grenade hit markers are going to be disabled, friendly fire will be turned on, you'll be playing Slayer, Capture the Flag, Strongholds, and Oddball, and then weapons, equipment, and grenades are going to have static spawns, meaning they're going to always appear in the same location on each map and mode combinations, and will respawn at the same intervals. We will not have the sort of rotating weapon spawns and equipment spawns that we had during the flights, obviously because those are the social settings. Like I mentioned there, during this blog post and during the video showcase that they did, 343 is using the terms ranked and competitive interchangeably, which led a lot of people to come to one of two conclusions: is that the only ranked mode is going to be Team Arena, or that all ranked modes are going to mirror the same HCS settings with BR starts and no radar. Although 343 didn't confirm or deny this, they said that they're going to have a full deep dive on playlists and the ranking system in the next month or so, so I think it's best we just hold off and wait to see what 343 says there, because basically anything that I would talk about here would be pure speculation, and it might be completely false once 343 comes out and clarifies a little bit. But that said, there is still a lot of stuff that we can talk about and discuss in the actual competitive settings that definitely is worth talking about. So, first things first, battle rifle starts. I think most of the competitive community is pretty on board with battle rifle starts, although there are a lot of people that feel that battle rifle starts kind of take away from the sandbox of Halo, as you then have a really powerful weapon off spawn, and therefore you don't necessarily have the desire to kind of scavenge the map and pick up weapons. 343 in their blog post themselves kind of countered that claim, and they said that they felt BR starts really led players to want to scavenge the map still in their testing compared to some of the other starting combinations that they had. Also, obviously, BR starts is just classic, and it's definitely a throwback to some of the older Halos. I think for ranked and competitive, I'm on board for BR starts, partly because I do enjoy the BR a lot, but also because I'm not really sure what other weapon Infinite would have went with as a starting weapon. For social settings, we obviously tested AR sidekick starts, and I definitely did not want to see those as a competitive and ranked settings, just because while those weapons did definitely encourage you to go and pick up precision weapons along the map, I felt they definitely led to more randomness. If you're stuck off spawn with those weapons, you can't necessarily fight back against someone that has a precision weapon, and obviously just having the AR in ranked takes away a little bit of the skill cap, as you have a fully automatic weapon that is, in all honesty, pretty easy to use. The only issue I have with BR starts in Halo Infinite is that the BR is honestly pretty easy to use. If you've ever played Halo 2 Anniversary, where the BR is basically a laser, that's kind of how it is in Halo Infinite. Sure, Halo Infinite has a lot faster strafe speeds, which I think will help to some degree, as you will actually be able to maybe make people miss a little bit when they're close or mid-range, and that's not something you can necessarily do in H2A, but the BR is definitely still an absolute laser, even getting into the further ranges, and I do think that doing BR starts is going to take away from the commando's role in the game. From my time playing in the flights, there's not many scenarios where I would go and pick up a commando if I already had a battle rifle, and maybe that'll change once I have more time to play and actually play with the competitive settings, but I really can't see too many scenarios where I pick up and use a commando, other than maybe to pick it up and hold on to it as a secondary, because with it being BR starts, it is only the battle rifle. You don't spawn with a second weapon. I think they could have got away with BR sidekick spawns, but honestly I am pretty okay with just BR starts, and I'm interested to see how it plays out. One important thing to keep in mind, and this kind of goes for everything we're going to talk about, is these are the settings for the launch of the game. If you've played competitively or just ranked in any of the other Halos, you'll know that as the game's lifespan goes on, the settings get iterated on and changed a bunch, and I'm sure Infinite probably won't be any different. I will say though that Infinite's starting settings seem a heck of a whole lot better than the starting settings that we had in Halo 4 or Halo Reach or Halo 5, or honestly even probably Halo 3, and that makes me pretty excited for competitive play in Halo Infinite. Next up, another another setting worth talking about is no radar. This is pretty much just a staple in competitive Halo for everything outside of Halo 5, and I'm definitely a fan of them bringing this back. In the first flight, they tested sort of the HCS H5 radar, where you only showed up on radar when you were sprinting or using an equipment or shooting or something like that. And while I think that could have worked, I'm definitely more of a fan of completely no radar for competitive. I'm definitely very glad that they're not keeping the social radar for competitive, as I think that takes away a lot of the skill cap that teams can kind of create with their communication and just knowledge of the game. So definitely a huge fan of no radar, really no downsides to that in my opinion. They even showed during some of the footage that you can make some pretty cool plays with no radar, where now you can kind of freely use the equipment to make plays, where if we were playing with that H5 HCS radar, you would show up on the radar and give away your play, and now you have more freedom to make those cool plays that'll really pop off for viewers when they're watching competitive games. Or if you're just playing in ranked and you want to make a cool play, you still kind of have that capability, knowing there isn't really a big downside to it, other than obviously if you mess up or you die or something like that. Next setting is team damage on. Again, another setting I'm definitely a fan of. I thought it was really weird in social how there wasn't team damage, because you could do all sorts of weird things where you could push on top of a teammate's grenade knowing it wouldn't damage you, and all sorts of other weird scenarios that would pop up with no team damage. Honestly, for social, I don't think that's the biggest deal in the world, but I'm very glad for ranked and competitive there will be team damage. One question though I still have, because they didn't clarify, is if there will be collision in ranked and competitive, as they did not touch on that. So I hope we get some clarification on that pretty soon, as I hope collision makes its return. Next up, I mentioned that there's no grenade hit markers. This is a great setting, really nothing bad to say about it. Grenade hit markers give away a bunch of information that shouldn't be given away in Halo, and if you ever played H2A hardcore or just H2A in general, it's very annoying, because once you get hit with a grenade and they know you're there, you just get spammed with grenades, or you get pushed when you're one shot, and that's just not very fun. I think competitive Halo, or just honestly Halo in general, works a lot better without grenade hit markers. The next big setting is that weapons, grenades, and equipment all have static spawns and will spawn in the same spot in the same location every game on a set interval, and I think this is great. If you watch some of my videos for the flights, one of my biggest concerns was those dynamic weapon spawns, as I thought those would really be detrimental for ranked and competitive play, just because they would add a degree of randomness to it, and I think players and teams will be able to prepare a lot better, knowing exactly what weapons are on what map, where they're going to be, and what the timers are going to be, and everything like that, so you can kind of create your strategies around all that. In social though, it's not a big deal if they stick to those dynamic spawns. It does let people try out different weapons, and it does keep games fresh from game to game. Still not a huge fan. I think you could go static for social, but dynamic in social is not the end of the world. I am really glad though that static weapons are going to be in ranked and competitive. Other than that, we have the game modes that we're going to be playing, which is Slayer, Capture the Flags, Stronghold, and Oddball. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think those are the exact same game modes that we played in late Halo 5. Honestly, these game modes aren't really a surprise at all, although you could say that using these 4 game modes, 343 is playing it a little bit safe, but I actually think that's totally okay. One thing to keep in mind is that these are the game modes that are going to be played at the launch of the game. Halo Infinite is going to have a whole ton of new game modes, and probably a bunch more game modes that come out throughout the lifespan of the game, and if the player base determines that some of those are worth testing out for competitive, we may see some of those rotate in or be added into the game mode and map pool, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Maybe it's like a little bit bummer that they're not trying something new or bringing back a game mode from an older game that we haven't had in a while, but I think these 4 game modes are very solid and very safe, and you can't really go wrong with these 4 game modes for competitive and ranked. The only one that I think might be slightly iffy is Slayer. Some professional and some competitive players don't like Slayer in the HCS settings, and that kind of just is what it is, but it's staying in. Slayer in Halo is pretty cool, and a lot of people definitely do like Slayer. One thing though that they did touch on in both the blog and during their showcase is that the scoring in Strongholds has actually changed in Halo Infinite, and I'm a big fan of this change. If you played Strongholds in Halo 5, the way you score in that game is by having at least 2 out of the 3 points, or you could score additional points if you had all 3. What would happen is sometimes the enemy team just didn't have enough time to completely cap your point to stop your scoring. So in Halo Infinite, the second you hop onto that second point and start capturing it, as opposed to getting a full cap, you will then stop the scoring, and then once you get the full cap and have 2 out of the 3 points, then you will begin scoring. I think this will be really cool because it'll make it easier for teams to turn games around and make comebacks, and while I haven't personally played with this setting change, from what I could tell in the video, I think this will be beneficial to Strongholds. Another setting that actually isn't any different from social is that Halo Infinite ranked and competitive will have equipment just like social does. This is something I saw some people saying they wanted removed, but honestly I'm really glad that they aren't removing it. Some of the plays that you can make with the repulsor repulsor and the grapple shot are extremely cool, and I think they will both be really fun to perform in ranked and also watch players make in tournaments, and I think this will lead to a better viewing experience and hopefully make Halo Infinite a little bit more exciting to watch. 343 actually talked about this one specifically, and they kind of talked about how in Halo 3 we had really good competitive settings, but one thing that the competitive settings did in Halo 3 was it completely removed equipment, and so 343 kind of wanted to rectify that with Infinite and actually keep in that equipment this time around. Now don't get me wrong, there is certain equipment that might be kind of unbalanced on certain maps, but that really shouldn't be a problem, because if it turns out that it is unbalanced or just is a huge pain on a certain map, 343 can get in there and remove that equipment from that map in the competitive settings, and it shouldn't be an issue. One slight example that maybe comes to mind for me, although I haven't really played competitive settings on it, is live fire. Maybe the repulsor on that one might get a little annoying if you constantly keep getting repulsored off the map, since there are open edges on that map as opposed to Bazaar or Recharge, which are more closed in maps. Another thing about the equipment in the blog post, 343 talked about how originally the repulsor did a lot more damage when you would bounce people into different cover or obstacles on the map, but they toned that down a lot to make it a little bit more balanced for competitive play, and I think that's probably a good thing, because it would have been really annoying if you could just get instant killed by the repulsor all the time. Another thing they talked about during the video is that you can still pocket power-ups. It is what it is. I'm not a huge fan of pocketing power-ups, but at this point it seems like 343 is definitely a fan of that interaction and wants to keep it in competitive, so it's definitely going to be there at launch. Probably will be there throughout the lifespan of the game, so it just is what it is. Like I said, I'm not a huge fan of pocketing power-ups. I think it can be kind of awkward, and I didn't see anything wrong with just how the power-ups worked in the previous games, but it's not the worst thing in the world. It's definitely something that you can adapt to and get used to. And that was pretty much it for the actual competitive settings. During the video, I just noticed a few things that I wanted to mention. It looks like they do have the sword in competitive, they do have the Mangler in competitive, and the Disruptor pistol in competitive. Obviously, we only saw one game on Recharge, so I'm sure there's more of the sandbox in competitive, but I'm interested to see how much of the sandbox Halo Infinite actually uses in competitive, because if there's one thing that I would say is slightly detrimental about Halo's competitive settings throughout the years, is it usually does limit the sandbox to a pretty decent degree, and while I totally understand why it does that to make the game as competitive as possible, I think for more casual players or more casual viewers, that can be a little bit detrimental, as it all kind of ends up sort of samey when you mostly just see people using nothing but the BR. Hopefully though, with things like the Mangler and the Disruptor pistol on the map and the sword, we will be seeing a variety of weapons and equipment on all these different maps, and it'll keep it fun and engaging for both players and viewers, while also not being super unbalanced to annoy those players like Halo 5 did during its early days, where basically everything was on the map and there was just autos and all sorts of stuff littered throughout the map for players to pick up. I think all in all, Halo Infinite's comp settings here going into the launch, like I mentioned earlier, are probably the best competitive settings that Halo has had at the launch of a game in a very long time. Honestly, don't get me wrong, I love Halo 3 competitive and Halo 2 competitive, and I won't claim to know Halo 2 competitive at the very start because I wasn't around back then, so maybe out of the box it worked pretty well, but Halo 3 did have pretty big changes from vanilla Halo 3 to the MLG settings that everyone is familiar with today. Higher movement speed, higher damage, a ton of the sandbox removed, a ton of the maps removed, and obviously going on to Reach and Halo 4 and Halo 5, those games at launch had some very questionable competitive settings, so it is refreshing with Halo Infinite. 343 really seems to be at least in the right direction, and maybe if little things need to be tweaked here or there, or things need to be shaken up a little bit in future seasons, that definitely can still happen, but it seems like we have a solid base here, and I'm really excited for Halo Infinite competitive. And that's pretty much going to do it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, you know what to do. Follow me over on Twitch, Twitter, or Instagram, and with that said, I'll see you all next time.